Alright. Let's get this thing on the road. Slideshow mode. Bam! Yu-Gi-Oh! Beginner's Guide. For my friends. I understand. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a very hard game. It's also very difficult to get into. So I'm trying to make it a little easier. But yeah, if anybody else finds this and you find this helpful, please like it. Bang! What are we covering? This video does not explain the mechanics that you learned in the Master Duel tutorial. If you play Master Duel, the tutorial will teach you all the mechanics. They do translate to the actual card game. My purpose is to teach you about specific cards, why the meta is the way that it is, and other little helpful tips. So you will learn, I'm hoping that you learn the other basic mechanics from actually just playing the game and experiencing it. Another important thing before we start, please use your resources. I was just like you at one point. I barely knew anything about the game. All I did was watch the anime, and I've learned a lot about the game from YouTube. So if you don't understand something, ask someone you know at your local game store, a friend like me, or watch a YouTube video. I have some of the best channels listed here. MBT Yu-Gi-Oh! Is one of my favorites. He always does videos testing the newest cards and decks. MSTTV makes good guides on the meta decks. Triff Yu-Gi-Oh! Is really he's just a funny dude, but he always plays the meta decks and he's like really good at the game. He's always topping something. Joshua Schmidt is another pro player, and he makes meta tier lists. And he actually posts his Master Duel gameplay because the Master Duel format is different from the TCG. This video is mainly talking about the TCG. Yeah, but some good websites as well. YGOPRODECK.com. It shows meta reports and deck lists for you to take. I get a lot of my deck lists from there, and it will show you a lot of cards that everybody's playing because it'll show you the people that like won the most recent tournaments. And then Dueling Book and Dueling Nexus, they let you build decks for free and test them online. Okay, let's do some clarification on the phases. So I had a friend who said that the phases were a confusing part of the game. So the phases are pretty difficult to grasp. It'll take you a while to understand them. Playing the game, you'll understand them more. But typically, you're going to do a lot of your stuff during main phase 1. If you're going first, you only have main phase 1, and then you pass, and your opponent gets all of the phases. But once you go into turn 3 and beyond, you're going to have all the phases there. So, when you're going first, you want to try and build a board so that your opponent can't beat you. And before you end your turn, you want to set all your stuff and then pass over, right? If you're going second, you want to try and create board presence in your main phase 1, then go into battle with all the monsters that you summon. Then main phase 2, you want to set up for your opponent's next turn if you didn't kill them. But the more you play, the more you're going to understand about the phases. A quick little tip, if you do have a quick play spell at the start of your turn, and you don't want to lose to Droll and Lockbird, which is a card we'll talk about later, you want to activate that card during your standby. The standby phase lets you can activate some cards in the standby, but they have to say quick effect, or they have to be quick play spells, or they have to have specific triggers that say during the standby phase. So you do have to unfortunately read your cards, but if you watch some guides on your specific deck, you'll see some cards that are typically activated in the standby phase. Okay, let's talk about staples. These are your hand traps and your board breakers. There's a couple on the screen right now that are really popular. The Fallen and the Virtuous is one that's really good this format in particular. Along with Phydralis Harmonia, you're going to see these two a lot in the best deck in the room. This one specifically is going to be in Cool Tune, which is the best deck. And this one's usually in Branded, but everybody's playing this card. It's a really good card. We'll get into the details about hand traps and board breakers in a bit, like right now. So, Over here on the right, we have board breakers, and over here on the left, we have hand traps. So if you ever do look at deck lists online, you're going to see almost everybody is either running board breakers, hand traps, or a mix of both. Like I said, the Fallen and the Virtuous is in a lot of decks. So the difference between the two is that hand traps are activated from your hand, typically during your opponent's turn, to try and stop them from doing stuff. This Ash Blossom is one of the most commonly known ones. Ash Blossom will stop your opponent from adding a card from their deck to their hand, from their graveyard to their hand, I'm pretty sure. And then there's one more that I totally forget, but usually it stops them from adding a card. Infinite Impermanence will negate a face-up monster on the field, and then Molcharmi Fuelos is really good, and we'll talk about it a bit later. But these cards are usually one-to-one trades. So, like, if your opponent summons a card, let's say Alistair the Invoker is like an older one, but when you normal summon Alistair, he adds Invocation, which is a fusion spell. You can Ash Blossom that so that he doesn't get to add his card. You can Impermit if you don't have Ash Blossom, and that will negate his effects while he's on the field. So, but usually it's you discard one card to stop one thing from happening, and you need a lot of hand traps in your hand to fully stop your opponent. Whereas with board breakers over here, these guys are typically activated on your turn, usually when you're going second, and they break boards, right? The Fallen and the Virtuous lets you destroy one card on the field by sending a fusion monster or a monster from your extra deck that mentions Fallen of Albaz, which is why it's good in the branded deck because they play a whole bunch of Albaz cards. Lightning Storm, you can pick either destroying all attack position monsters your opponent has or all spell and traps your opponent has. And then Forbidden Droplet negates a certain amount of cards depending on how many cards you send from your field or hand to the graveyard. So board breakers are used to destroy an opponent's board, and they're typically like spells, but there are some monsters that are kind of like board breakers. If you look at deck lists, you'll see what board breakers everybody is playing. Okay, let's talk about the Charmies. These guys absolutely change the game when they're activated, and you're going to have to change your whole game plan when your opponent activates a Charmy. They're usually going to have them, when you have them going first, they're not very useful because they have to be activated when you control no cards. So that's really important effect. You have to have nothing on your field to activate them. So they're really good for you if you're going second and you have one of them. So they allow you to draw cards every time your opponent special summons. So Perulia here will let you draw a card when your opponent special summons from the hand, and Fuelos allows you to draw a card when your opponent special summons from the deck or the extra deck. So this one's like a lot better because modern Yu-Gi-Oh! They're always summoning from the extra deck. So there probably will be combo guides depending on your deck that tell you how to play through a Charmy, but you typically don't want to do your full combo when your opponent activates a Charmy because you're basically just going to let them draw a whole bunch of cards. You don't want that to happen because then they can full combo you and all that other stuff. Basically, you're going to lose if they draw a whole bunch of cards off their Charmies. So you're going to want to make sure you have a combo that plays around these guys, or a combo you can use after they activate one. And then important note here, Charmies can be Ash Blossom. So if you remember Ash Blossom that we talked about earlier, this prevents you from adding cards, right? So if they activate one of these Charmies and you have an Ash Blossom, you should usually use it to negate the Charmy so that they don't get to draw a whole bunch of cards. And then also there's another card called Call by the Grave, which I think we have right here. This will banish it from the graveyard and negate its effects, so you can call it by it. Okay, and Duel and Lockbird. This card is pretty annoying. It's currently only at 2, so you can only play 2 copies of it, but it's kind of like the Charmies. So what it does is after you add a card from your deck to your hand, they can activate Duel, and then for the rest of the turn, you can't add cards from your deck to your hand except by drawing them, which is really unfortunate. It will mess up your combos, but a lot of the modern decks nowadays can play around it, either by having effects that let you send cards from your deck to the graveyard, because you can still send cards from your deck to your graveyard, you just can't add them to your hand. So you should try and find a combo that works around Droll. Or at least try and set up like a half board, not like a full board. Because if they do have Droll, they might have another hand trap too. So learning to play around hand traps is important, which is what this slide is talking about right here. Some decks that you may play, that you may want to play, may not be on a tier list because they lose to a singular hand trap. When I was talking about Alistair the Invoker earlier, that's a pretty old card, but they did recently get support. But Alistair would usually just eat hand traps, and if you didn't have any other cards to help you play, then you basically had to pass your turn with just that guy on the board. So a deck that you may think looks really cool might not be very good, because if your opponent Ash Blossoms one of your cards, you have to pass your turn. But most modern decks will have follow-up, which basically just means, or like an extender, which basically just means you have a card that lets you play through a singular interruption. So even if your normal summon gets stopped by an infinite impermanence, you may have a spell card in your hand that lets you summon another guy, so you can keep playing. Another note here, if your deck struggles going second, so like you put a whole bunch of hand traps in your deck, and even though you hand trap your opponent to death, they still make a full board, and then you go second and you just lose, you might want to try playing board breakers instead. Because board breakers will let you just destroy a board, so you don't even have to worry about the interruptions. You can just get rid of everything. Most board breakers will destroy monsters, so if you're playing against a deck that has a lot of board breakers, you might want to be playing a deck that has good back row, like a quick play spell or like a trap that could potentially negate something like a Fallen and the Virtuous or a Forbidden Droplet. So negates are pretty good, being able to negate the spell cards. But overall, just having back row that lets you play even if like a lot of your monsters get destroyed is pretty good. So like Cool Tune and Branded have really good spells and traps that can be set and activated, so they can play through board breakers a decent bit. But board breakers still affect like every deck in the game. Board breakers are still good, don't get me wrong. Same thing with hand traps. Hand traps are also pretty good. It's just in this current format, hand traps aren't as impactful as board breakers. But some combo guides will tell you how exactly you can play around specific board breakers. Most decks will not be able to perfectly play through like 2 board breakers, but maybe 1. Like for example, the Fallen and the Virtuous can only destroy 1 card. So like if your deck only ends on like 1 monster, then that probably isn't a very good deck. You might need to have like 2 or 3 on the board. It depends on what your deck does. But for the most part, board breakers are pretty good right now. Okay, let's talk about the meta. If you remember me talking about YGO Pro deck earlier, I got this chart from there. It tells you the percentages of all of the best decks in the game. So Cool Tune is by far the best deck, followed by Branded, which I was talking about earlier, then Doom Z, Elf Note, Mitsurugi, and Sky Striker. Particularly Mitsurugi and Sky Striker are 2 really good budget decks. If you get the legendary modern decks, you get basically both of the full decks. You might need to get a couple more cards for Sky Striker, but you basically get both of these decks. And even though they have low representation, they're still pretty good, just not as impressive as Cool Tune is. Cool Tune is just kind of above the fold in everything else. Branded has a decent matchup anyway. You can beat Cool Tune, it's just kind of hard. And let's talk about why Cool Tune is so good. Cool Tune gets 3 normal summons throughout its cards, which is, you usually have 1, but their field spell gives them an additional normal summon. And this card right here, Cool Tune Rotary, also gives them a normal summon. And then their other Cool Tune cards will special summon themselves, which is where the 3 special summons come from, excluding them summoning their synchro guys, okay? The gimmick with Cool Tune is that they can synchro summon using monsters in the hand. So Cool Tune will typically play a decent bit of hand traps, because you can use your hand traps to make your synchro guys. And then also, one big noteworthy thing that makes this deck really good is that Rotary lets you look at your opponent's hand. So if you're playing against Cool Tune, they will have perfect hand knowledge on you, which is why this deck is probably the best deck in the room, because they know exactly how to play around all your guys. But you can beat the deck. It is possible to beat them. They are weak to removal. You have to destroy their guys before they synchro summon. So you want to play a lot of board breakers. This is why board breakers are good right now. When they summon their guys, they need to use synchro monsters. They need to use tuner monsters specifically in their hand to make their synchro monsters. So if they don't have a monster on the field, they can't synchro summon. So if you can destroy their guys before they can synchro summon, you can prevent them from getting anything on the board. That is pretty difficult though, because they have a lot of monsters and lots of different effects, which is why when I play against Cooltoon, usually I play board breakers and I wait for them to set up all their stuff or whatever. Maybe I'll have a hand trap, and then I'll just destroy everything once they summon all their stuff with my board breakers going second. If you can stop Cooltoon RS has a negate, which means it will negate one of your activated effects. You want to try and stop that summon, but it might be difficult if you don't have hand traps, but board breakers will probably do the trick. Another thing that's important, all of their cards have adding effects, either from deck or graveyard. So Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring and Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion, which I didn't talk about, but it's right here. Ghost Bell prevents them from adding a card from their graveyard to their hand, or special summoning from the graveyard. So Ghost Bell and Ash Blossom are pretty similar in that. It's just this one's more for the graveyard, this one's more from the deck. They are good against most of their monsters. If you think they're playing Fulos or a Charmy, then you might want to save the Ash Blossom, but usually Cooltoon players don't play the Charmies. If you do have Ash Blossom, though, I suggest Ash Blossoming their spells. Synchro Overtake is a really good spell. It's currently at 1, they only have 1 copy of it, but Cooltoon Synchro is at 3, I'm pretty sure, and it lets them do a whole bunch of crazy stuff. It can also be activated twice per turn, so you can activate 2 Cooltoon Synchros, which is crazy. Which is why you should read your cards and see when you can activate them. But, like I said, you can save your Ash for a Charmy or whatever. You can imperm their Cooltoon Q, which I don't have here. I didn't put a picture in. Or you can imperm like their normal summon. I usually save my imperms for when it's my turn, because I can stop whatever on their board I think is annoying. Like, for example, if you imperm their RS on their ending board, like when they pass their turn, it goes to your turn. You use imperm on their RS, then they either negate it or they don't, and now it can't use its negate for the rest of the turn, so you can just board break them into the sun. But yeah, the deck is pretty oppressive. Their synchro monsters have a whole plethora of effects that I didn't put down here. If you're interested in playing Cooltoon, it is pretty expensive for a new player, but you should read their cards online so you understand what exactly they're going to do, because it's good to know what a deck is going to do before you play against it. Especially because a lot of the cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are just like knowledge checks. So watch some guides on Cooltoon, how to beat Cooltoon. MST TV has a really good 10-minute video showing you how to beat Cooltoon. So, yep. Let's talk about Branded now. It's the second best deck in the game. Branded's engine is also really strong, just like Cooltoon's. All of their cards have effects that allow them to come back. So, like Incredible Cliche here, if you send a fusion monster to the graveyard during your turn, at the end phase, it will add itself back. All of their cards trigger in the end phase usually. Like Albion, for example, will set a branded spell or trap directly from your deck, which is why people are playing the Fallen and the Virtuous in every deck, because they'll use the Fallen and the Virtuous, send Albion, destroy one of your cards, and then during the end phase, they'll get to set another Fallen and the Virtuous, because this lets you set a branded spell or trap, and this is treated as a branded spell or trap. Hope that made sense. But which is why this engine's splashable in like everything. If you play 3 Fallen and the Virtuous and then like 2 Albions, you'll be able to, or you have to play 3 Albion in that case, or another branded extra deck monster, and then you can keep activating the Fallen and the Virtuous like 3 times. But anyway, all their cards are going to come back. They have a really good grind game, which means they want to play as long as they can, because they're going to beat you in resources. This deck is also pretty bad into board breakers. They have one of the best board breakers, but they don't have a lot of negates. So they activate most of their effects in the end phase, which I said earlier. they want to get a whole bunch of resources. Hand traps aren't very good against this deck, besides using Ash Blossom on Branded Fusion. Branded Fusion is, I think it's at 1, but it will get them a lot of advantage when they activate it, so you should probably Ash Blossom that. But its best interruption is its spells and traps, like the Fallen and the Virtuous. Mirror Jade, which is this big guy back here, will be summoned, and he can destroy a card on the field. And then, of course, Fallen of Albaz, the main man behind the entire archetype. If you have a way to negate the Fallen of Albaz, you should negate it, because this guy, when he's summoned, will fusion summon using your monsters, which means he can fuse one of your guys into Mirror Jade and then destroy an additional card. So he gets rid of 2 cards with one guy. And they can summon Albaz on your turn to get rid of your stuff. So you should try and negate this if you can. But like I said earlier, Branded's biggest weakness is board breakers. They don't have like any negates to stop you from destroying their stuff. And like I said earlier, with their spells and traps being really good, Harpy's Feather Duster, which destroys all spell and traps on the field, is really good against their deck. Another card you'll see is Blazing Cartesia. If they activate its effect, you don't want to destroy it because it's a quick effect and it lets you fusion summon. So you want to try and negate it after they activate the effect. Don't negate it before, because then they'll just activate the effect and fusion summon. If you remember Ghost Spell we talked about earlier, Ghost Spell should be saved for Albion so that they can't set the Fallen and the Virtuous, because you remember this guy's just going to keep setting that over and over again. And the biggest thing when you're playing against Branded, or any deck that has a grind game, is you want to try and beat them in one turn if it's possible. After you break their board, they have nothing else they can do against you. You want to summon your biggest attackers and try and kill them in one turn, because they're, like I said, they're just going to activate all of their effects in the end phase. They're going to get all their dudes back, and then they're going to be able to do their full combo again and again and again. So if you can beat them as soon as you stop all their stuff, then they won't be able to do all their grind game, and then you just win the game. But yeah. Okay. I know this is a little short. There were a lot of other decks that were here that we could have talked about, but I hope this helps you understand hand traps and board breakers, which are important staples, and how to analyze Yu-Gi-Oh decks, because that is the most important thing that I'm learning right now in my journey in the game. And it's just understanding what a deck does and how to beat it. Most decks do similar things with their own different gimmicks. So like Cool Tune and Branded, they both add cards, summon cards, and try to negate or destroy cards in some manner or way. So I hope that seeing how I analyzed and broke apart this deck helps you to potentially beat other decks. So maybe watch some guides on some of these other decks if you're interested, and how to beat them, like their weaknesses, so that you can start to understand the game a little bit more. And then, of course, knowing how to play against hand traps like Duel and Lockbird, the Charmies, and board breakers as a whole. If you do have any questions, comment or ask me or whatever. And if you do want a part 2 where I even talk about those other decks, I will indeed do that. But yes, that is the end of the video.